Okay, Ambassador Fatima, could you speak? Are you? Oh, we still can't hear you. Is someone helping the ambassador? Is there your device? Sometimes that creates a problem. Okay. No, we still can't hear you.
No.
Speak.
Tamrat, can you hear me? This is DSG Mohammed.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
DSG.
I'm just checking we're back on and that we're with you for the moment. I'm not sure how long for, but I can see and hear you.
Okay, very good. We'll sort this out. If not, perhaps. Hello?
I can help.
Okay, perhaps Joanna, you could, while we wait for the technical issues to be sorted out, perhaps you could get us started in the interest of time. I know the DSG has also a tight schedule.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, these things happen. But I will just step in so that we don't waste a lot of time. And I have the pleasure of introducing the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Her Excellency Ms. Amina Mohammed, that needs no introduction. And I know time is of the essence. Deputy Secretary General, the floor is yours. And I really want to appreciate your presence here with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, Excellencies, our distinguished participants, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, really very happy to be with you today. Let me just say Happy Africa Day in advance, as well as Ramadan Kareem. But let me begin by expressing my...
It is the time of my fast.
Could everyone who's not speaking silence or mute your microphones, please? I mean, I'm afraid we're not hearing you. Something's going wrong. You're not muted, are you?
Am I okay?
Now you can hear you.
Okay, let me start again. I'd like to express my deep appreciation to my sister and the Special Advisor to the Secretary General, Beans Garnas, for her leadership, her passion, her vision for Africa, which has therefore brought much credit to the UN in the years that she's been with us. But I'd also like to thank the team, because without the team, we would not have had the Africa Dialogue series, nor would we have had the leadership that you gave us on the Africa policy paper that was launched today by the Secretary General. So thank you so much for that support and that leadership. I'm really pleased that we're participating. Again, history's been made because this is the first virtual edition of the Africa Dialogue series, and in particular, this session on global solidarity to discuss the role of the international community in silencing the guns in Africa, particularly in the view of the new challenges that have been posed by COVID-19. I see African Union colleagues, and I'd like to acknowledge, as I see Ibrahim Mayaki, Amir Al-Fadel, and Fatima Kari, of course, will be coming on, but she's with us here in New York. When the Secretary General launched his prevention agenda on taking office, he highlighted the importance of addressing the nexus between peace, human rights, humanitarian assistance, and development, and stressed the need to invest in inclusive, sustainable development to achieve durable peace. In recent years, we've intensified even further our partnership with the African Union and its member states to scale up our attention to prevention, the prevention of conflicts, crises, vulnerabilities at large, and ultimately the prevention of human suffering. At the heart of our efforts lies the recognition that the 2063 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals are the best prevention tools that we have at our disposal. The COVID-19 pandemic has amplified the relevance and the urgency of delivering on these objectives. The pandemic has also brought back to the fore the complexities in dealing with issues that sit right at the nexus between peace building, development, humanitarian action, and human rights. COVID-19 is not only a threat to our health, but a human crisis of multiple dimensions. And COVID-19 also challenges us in our common goal of silencing the guns in Africa. Let me allude to three reasons that may be this way. First, the pandemic is worsening the socioeconomic conditions of countries that were already struggling with their situation, and it is affecting their vulnerable populations even more. Increased unemployment, shortages of basic foods and goods, famine, collapse of public services are just some of the consequences of the pandemic that undermine the gains made in the implementation of the 2063 Agenda and the 2030. When the General Assembly proclaimed the Decade of Action on the Sustainable Development Goals, it was against the background of a concerning reality. The world wasn't on track to achieve the SDGs. The COVID-19 pandemic has placed the bar now even higher. Second, the COVID-19 pandemic is likely to exacerbate existing tensions. Economic shocks and threats to livelihoods are exacerbating the structural causes of conflict. Over 20 elections are expected to take place in Africa in 2020. Conducting elections in the midst of the pandemic-related restrictions or managing their postponement will present serious challenges and could create further tensions. Additionally, disinformation, human rights violations in the application of emergency powers and restrictive measures, and pandemic-related stigmatization compound the risks. Furthermore, peace-building and peacekeeping, mediation and managing peace processes have become even more difficult with some of the restrictions that have been put in place to fight the pandemic. The third is 2020 is the year of silencing of the guns in Africa. All our efforts and attention were to be focused on addressing the root cause of active guns. But now, the focus of attention has significantly shifted towards the costly fight against COVID-19. The response to the COVID-19 outbreak must not result in a diversion of vital funds and resources away from silencing the guns. It should not distract us from the urgent need to end violence and conflict and to lift people out of poverty and hunger, which still remain the key goals of African governments, African institutions, and the international community. In other words, silencing the guns and the fight against COVID are not mutually exclusive, but must rather be pursued in tandem. This is a reason why the SG, in one of his first measures after the outbreak, called for a global ceasefire. Global solidarity is now more important than ever before. No single country or region or community can effectively address the challenges posed by the COVID pandemic alone. But what is so obvious and has proven to be difficult in practice. Furthermore, global solidarity entails continuing to invest in prevention and conflict resolution. In today's opening remarks, the Secretary General commended the swift response of the African governments to the COVID pandemic. Allow me to echo him. The African Union and government leaders have stepped up to the occasion and in the face of the crisis have deepened regional coordination and excised solidarity. Thanks to a common vision and the unquestionable resolve, the continent had embarked before the crisis on a path of growth and of structural and digital transformation with Agendas 2030, 2063, providing a clear roadmap for the way forward. The ingredients of these gains must be sustained. The only road to recovery is the road of integration. But Africa cannot do that alone. The continent needs to count on its support and collaboration from its partners. As the Secretary General said today, the UN will continue to advocate for international action to support the continent, and the UN agencies, country teams, peacekeeping operations, and humanitarian workers, who all have their hands on deck and are on the front lines of this crisis. But as we confront together the complexity of the COVID epidemic, I'm convinced that the crisis also provides us with three clear opportunities. First is a unique opportunity to raise our ambition in our response to COVID and its impact on Africa, and to accelerate progress on the SDGs as envisaged in the Decade of Action. We need to ensure that we build back better for the people of Africa, and we need to be mindful in dealing with the multiple crises created by the pandemic of the enduring interlinkages between peace, security, development, and human rights. For example, as part of the Programme for Preventing Violent Extremism, the UN system in Benin started working with the UN systems of Togo and Burkina Faso to increase the resilience of the population in the cross-border areas. The porosity of the borders in the region is a factor that contributes to illicit trafficking and to the spread of violent groups, and that is now multiplying the risks of a contagion effect between neighbouring countries. By addressing border security issues and preventing the flow of populations, a programme aimed at tackling peace and security issues is now being an effective tool to contribute to fight a health pandemic. UN peacekeeping missions are also taking this approach. In the Central African Republic, MINUSCA has financed COVID-19 information sessions for civil servants and social workers and supplied information materials for distribution amongst the Central African Armed Forces and the general population. And MONUSCO, in using its local radio station to inform the local population about COVID-19 in local languages, is working to dispel rumours and counter misinformation. Second, several countries are declaring a state of emergency to curb the spread of the virus. As High Commissioner Bachelet has said in the previous session, COVID-19 cannot be an excuse to derogate fundamental freedoms and rights, but it is rather a more pressing reason for increasing inclusiveness by focusing our efforts on traditionally marginalized groups and vulnerable populations. The UN's Rise for All initiative is a good example of how we can counter our common fight against COVID-19 to increase awareness about the key role that women play in their societies. Beyond just our narrative of carrying the burden of poverty, of gender-based violence, of exclusion, we are now seeing women taking up leadership roles, filling the vacuum where men have not been able to do so. And third, let us use this time of the crisis to demonstrate the value of multilateralism. As the Secretary General stated, global challenges require global solutions. At the beginning of the crisis, some countries thought that they could face the crisis on their own, closing borders and isolating themselves. But pandemics do not recognize borders. We saw it with the Ebola crisis, and we are seeing it again now. A strong multilateral system is key to winning this battle and to preventing future ones. We have to leverage existing partnerships and collaborations, including the two joint frameworks between the African Union and the United Nations on peace and security and on sustainable development. The African Union's Lusaka Roadmap and the African Joint Continental Strategy for COVID identify key areas for achieving the goals of silencing the guns and defeating COVID. These provide valuable frameworks for a coordinated response and investments in Africa. This is an opportune moment to mobilize global solidarity to ensure that the implementation of these plans and to transform them into actions that will address the realities that we are faced with in our response now, but also in our recovery tomorrow. Debt restructuring should be at the core of global solidarity. The United Nations is closely working with the governments, the African Union, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the European Union, and other IFIs to advocate for favourable financial conditions for developing countries, especially Africa. This is not about the category of countries. It has gone beyond that in the COVID pandemic to identifying the vulnerabilities. Many countries that are not poor, that are not low income, are now facing the same vulnerabilities. Exceptional circumstances call for exceptional solidarity, generosity, and coordination. In fighting against COVID-19 and advancing towards silencing all guns in Africa, how we act now will significantly determine the prospect of achieving a stronger, more prosperous, and peaceful Africa. Let's build our response to the coronavirus crisis on the strong foundations of Africa's demonstrated determination to advance towards sustainable development. Let's commit to raising the ambition with urgency, fostering participation and solutions under the Decade of Action for delivery of the SDGs and Agenda 2063. Let us act together. Difficult decisions lie ahead of us, but let us turn the crisis into opportunity. As was once often said, let's not waste a good crisis. This is our only real option if we are to deliver on our promises of a better future for the world and to the African continent. Thank you very much, Beans, and to the teams and to our special guests.
Yeah.
Deputy Secretary General. And sorry. We appreciate your leadership in driving the sustainable development agenda globally. But we also appreciate you as the daughter of the African soil. And we are proud of what you have done so far, not only for the continent, but for the world. Pandemics don't recognize borders. You are absolutely right. You are also absolutely right when you are saying that exceptional circumstances call for exceptional solidarity. No country can do this on its own. I thank you very much, DSG. I now have the pleasure to invite my dear sister and colleague from the African Union, Commissioner Amira El Fadil, Commissioner for Social Affairs. And I want to smile and I want to welcome her because that is the position that I occupied for 9 years. But unlike, I did not go through an Ebola crisis and I did not go through the COVID crisis. But what you are doing in providing the leadership is commendable, and I really want to thank you. I don't want to waste a lot of time in really going through the bios of each of the panelists, but you know her. She has been the face of the African Union Commission since January this year, mobilizing international support and international solidarity for Africa. So without much ado, my sister, can I give you the floor? And maybe something I need to mention is that it was not deliberate that we have got an all-women session, but that is how life goes. And it was not deliberate. I just realized now when I'm looking at all of you, but we don't need to find excuses. Please welcome, welcome, Amira.
Thank you very much, Sister Banice. Thank you very much for having me as part of the Africa Dialogue Series panelist. And I would like also to give my greetings to our sister, the UN Deputy Secretary General, Her Excellency Amina Mohammed. And I was listening since the beginning, since the opening actually of this meeting. And we have listened to excellent presentations from the Secretary General and from all the participants in the opening and in the moderators in the second session. let me start by saying that yes, Banis, I've not been to the first Ebola, but I have been with my sister Mueti in the second Ebola in DRC, and now we are facing COVID-19. The right beginning for this statement is really to acknowledge the political will and the leadership of our heads of states and governments in Africa. They, from the day one, from the beginning, when this pandemic started to hit Africa, they agreed to act in unity and solidarity. And for me, this is the starting point of everything we are doing right now at the African Union Commission, that there is a leadership, there is a decision from this leadership that they have to act in unity and solidarity as Africa. And they agreed that the leadership for this, it has to come from the African Union Commission, and technically to be led by the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Excellencies, a continental strategy for COVID-19 response was developed, and the task force on coronavirus was launched to coordinate the preparedness and response efforts on the continent. The continental strategy and the task force have been adopted by member states' health ministers during the 22nd February emergency ministerial meeting on COVID-19 held at the AU headquarters. And I would like to mention here that the chairperson of the African Union Commission attended the meeting and addressed the meeting. Also, the Director General of WHO, Dr. Tedros, also participated through VTC and also addressed the meeting. My sister, Dr. Mueti, she came physically to Addis Ababa, and she was part of this very important meeting for the ministers of health. In that meeting, at the time of the meeting, actually on the 22nd of February, Africa has only one case in Egypt. But it's better that we started, and we started early, and that's why we are now managing to do some sort of control. In this strategy, there is 4 key areas that we agreed to work on it and to enhance it while we are implementing this strategy. We agreed on enhancing cooperation, collaboration, communication, and coordination between all African member states and between the African member states and the African Union Commission. Excellencies, under the leadership of Africa CDC and African member states and the global partners, I mentioned WHO because we are working very closely with WHO, but there is many partners. I will mention some of them during my presentation. Under the leadership of Africa CDC and African member states and the global partners like WHO, are part of the African technical working groups. We have 7 technical working groups on surveillance, laboratory, countermeasures, healthcare preparedness, risk communication, and social engagement, supply chain management, special population settings and policies, science standards and regulations, and coordinations and collaborations. Africa CDC facilitates the task force weekly calls that act as a vehicle to transfer the global experiences to Africa and exchange lessons learned. An African anti-COVID-19 fund has been established by the Bureau of the Assembly of the African Union Heads of States and Government. This Board of Trustees convened its 3rd meeting today. They have elected, there is 10 members of the Board of Trustees on the special fund on COVID-19. They elected the chair of the African Exim Bank as the chair of the fund, and they elected a former Minister of Health of Egypt as a vice chair to this fund. The fund has 2 main objectives as being set in the TOR for the fund. The first objective is for this fund to support Africa CDC on doing the pool procurement of medical commodities that's needed for African member states. And the projection is already being made by Africa CDC. The second objective for the establishment of the fund is to enable us in the African Union Commission to send responders, experts, and volunteers to member states upon request, also to support their technical capacities. Excellencies, when it comes to the support that we are receiving from our partners, and allow me here to give some examples, I'm not going to cover all. The partners are participating in the fund for the implementation of the Joint Continental Strategy for COVID-19 outbreak. And I will give examples like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Wellcome, Trust, and Canada. And some of our partners are giving in-kind donations, like they're giving PPEs, testing kits, and reagents, and face shields. And I will give an example for this is Jack Ma Foundation donations. They gave to donations through the government of Ethiopia. And the third one was given directly to Africa CDC and to the African Union Commission. Also, some of our partners, they are supporting the provision of management and public health experts. For example, McKinsey, Dalberg Foundation, and I can mention also UK government. These are supporting in this area. Others are supporting, and we are having agreements to facilitate supply chain of essential commodities to Africa. Close collaboration and partnership with UN agencies, including WFP, and I mentioned earlier WHO, in delivering COVID-19 commodities to country level. Agreements with providers to allocate certain amount of commodities to Africa. Africa CDC has been collaborating with more than 50 partners, and their different stages of some are still under negotiations. Pledges support to Africa CDC were made, or others have already given the support to Africa CDC. And just before this meeting, I've been informed by Deputy Director of Africa CDC that the pledges made now exceeded $100 million to Africa CDC. And we are very grateful to all our partners for this support. Partners are either supporting Africa CDC or giving the support to the fund on the anti-COVID-19. So we have established two funds, a fund that to support directly Africa CDC as an institution and to build the capacity of Africa CDC and to make sure that we are within this crisis to finalize the establishment of the 5 regional collaborating centers, because we are still at the beginning. So we are using this crisis as an opportunity to fully establish Africa CDC as a technical body. But at the same time, we are using the other fund, which is the main fund, the anti-COVID-19 fund, for the support that's going to be given from Africa CDC to our member states. Partners categories is as follows. Philanthropic private foundations, I mentioned as an example, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation plus Jack Ma Foundation. Multilateral, and I mentioned here all the UN agencies that are working with us. There is bilateral organizations. I mentioned Wellcome Trust, but I would like to mention here US CDC, China CDC, Europe CDC, all of them, they have partnerships with us. Our African member states themselves, and they are the first to come forward and to put pledges to fill the gaps for the financial resources needed for the response. And I can mention South Africa, Egypt, Kenya, Zimbabwe, and around 9 member states, they gave support to our efforts. There is countries outside Africa, like Australia, Canada, Japan, China, also they are giving donations. Individual donors, Africans, private sector, private sector personalities, foundations, banks like Bank of America, Commercial Bank of Egypt, Africa 50, and McKinsey. A lot of partners really, they are giving us money. And I would like also to mention the European Union. We are negotiating with the European Union a fund that's coming directly from the European Union and also from some of the European Union member states like Sweden and Germany. New partners and returning partners like Canada and China. Africa CDC is having new partners supporting the strategy, and some partners provide additional support after recognizing the impact of their initial support. This signifies the trust in AU and Africa CDC leadership. Excellencies, I intentionally decided to put my presentation in a way that it shows the appreciation from our side. Although I cannot mention all the names of the partners, I mentioned some, but really I wanted to share with you that partnership is very important for Africa as a continent. Partnership is very important for us to fight COVID-19, and more financial resources are still needed to win the fight against COVID-19. We are still at the beginning as a continent, but the number of the cases are rising every day. We thank God that the death toll is not high in Africa so far, and the recoveries are in large numbers, but still the fight is far from over. So I'm using this opportunity, my sister Peace and all participants, to say that Africa still need more and more financial resources to mitigate the harm of this COVID-19 on the continent. And I'm a very optimistic person. I like always to have hope while I'm working. I think with all the gloomy picture we see when we sit to the news every day, we have hope in Africa. And we have solidarity with our partners. And I would like to end my statement by commending my sister, Dr. Moeti. We are working very closely together. The level of partnership we have on the level of Africa with me and Moeti, and the level of the partnership between our chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency Musa Faki Mohammed, with his brother, Dr. Tedros, is really supporting us and helping us in delivering on our responsibilities. Thank you very much, Sister Peace. Thank you very much to all of you here listening. And thank you for having me in this series. And we will be following the outcomes, and definitely it will guide us and it will benefit us in doing our work in a better way. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you, Commissioner Amira. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
wonderful.
We can hear Fatma. Ambassador Fatma, greetings.
Greetings, my sister. I'm glad to be able to finally join you all. Technology is a wonderful thing, but only when it cooperates, and thank God it chose to cooperate with us now. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us today. And in the interest of time, permit me to stand on existing protocols and very quickly recognize and thank the DSG, Amina Mohammed. I know she's left us now. And of course, my dear sister, Commissioner Amira El-Fadil, for their contributions. We'll now continue with the panel, but I will be a bit less generous than my dear sister USG Gawanas and kindly remind our panelists that we have until 1 o'clock for this session. And so I'll be giving 5 minutes each to the next distinguished panelists in order for us to be able to have time for Q&A and some interactive dialogue. So without much further ado, I will now introduce the next panelist who will further examine ways of strengthening the solidarity and partnership, including on silencing the guns and in the immediate, medium, and long term. Our next panelist really needs no introduction. She's definitely the best person to speak to us on this. I have the honor to introduce USG Hannah Tete, the head of the UN Office of the African Union. USG, you have the floor.
To the DSG for her opening remarks. I hope you can all hear me. Thank you very much to my Gawanas for organizing the Africa Dialogues, and to my colleague panelists, excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Seeing as I have to be careful with the time, I will try as much as possible to be brief, but I just wanted to commend the African Union for the way in which it showed a certain sense of dynamism in being able to respond to the COVID challenge. Now, USG Gawanas, when you were making your opening remarks, you said that it wasn't intentional that the panelists were entirely women, but I dare say that people have recognized that some of the most effective COVID responses have been led by women. And on the continent, we have to give that credit to Commissioner El Fadil, because while our heads of state have been very proactive, and under the chairmanship of South Africa and the Bureau of Heads of State, they quickly set up their COVID response. There was engagement with the private sector. There was the establishment of the trust fund. There was cooperation between Africa CDC and the regional offices, and also with WHO, the Africa Region Office. There was also the team at the Social Affairs Department that was actually making sure that what they decided got done. And it was Commissioner El Fadil who led that team. And that brings me to this issue of partnerships. The partnership that we have with the African Union, the totality of the UN-AU partnership, both on peace and security and on development, has to be able to manifest itself at times like this. I would like to focus on COVID and peace and security, because I think that there's been quite a bit of discussion on the development challenge, the humanitarian challenge, and the need to be able to respond to COVID as a disease. But there's also the need to look at the response to COVID in the areas where we already have peace and security challenges, and where we need to be able not to take our eyes off the ball in order to make sure that we don't lose the gains that have already been made. And to that extent, colleagues who are working both in political missions and peacekeeping missions have also been supporting AU member states in this regard. In Somalia, ANSOM is working with the federal government to assist with COVID-19 response planning and activities. UN agencies and partners have also launched the Somalia COVID-19 Country Preparedness and Response Plan to address the direct public health and indirect humanitarian and socioeconomic consequences of COVID-19. In South Sudan, UNMISS is actively supporting COVID-19 prevention and preparedness efforts by providing technical and logistical support to enhance national capacity to test and manage cases of infection, expand availability of hospital beds, and train health workers. And this also includes a major nationwide education, information, and awareness campaign on COVID-19 prevention. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, MONUSCO is providing hours of broadcast schooling to 22 million children currently at home. And they're also supporting the efforts to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 in prisons and other places of detention. And there are more efforts that are deployed across the continent. But where we have the challenge is perhaps where we have some of our most significant crises. And one of those crises that I would like to draw attention to is the situation in Libya. We have not been able to fully fund the humanitarian response plan. We are only $4 million into the COVID response plan. And this is one of the countries on the continent where we do not actually have sufficient capacity to be able to deal with the COVID pandemic. And so as we discuss partnership, I would like to draw attention to the places where I think there's much more work to be done. The focus on building partnerships, and especially in the context of the African Union, the partnership between the center and the regional economic communities, and the structures they have in terms of specific organizations dealing with the health challenge and others that don't exactly have the same framework, I think is an important part of the integration agenda going forward. It's important for Africa to be able to use this opportunity to plan. When you don't have a lot of resources, you plan properly so that you can deploy them as best as you can, given the limited space that you have. And I would very much like to encourage our partnership going forward to see how the United Nations can support the African Union with effective operational planning and support member states in the same way, so that for those that do not have the same state capacities to be able to manage an effective response, we are able to provide that backup in a way that ensures that the response is given. And the final point that I would like to make is that, especially as we are focusing on challenges of peace and security, the DSG mentioned in her comments that we're going to have about 20 elections on the continent this year. Well, there are about 18 left. Today we had the election in Burundi. In a month or two's time, we are going to have the upcoming election in Malawi as a result of the Supreme Court ruling. There are other elections that were scheduled on the continent's agenda that are still yet to happen. And from all indications, it appears as if the various political stakeholders are determined in having the majority of those elections. And so the question we need to ask ourselves is that within that context, what do we do in terms of helping to support and helping to, as it were, assist electoral management bodies in their planning so that if they have to conduct an election, it is done in such a way that it does not become another point for an increase or for a spike in COVID infections? How do we engage political actors? Essentially, what do we do on the early warning front to make sure that we address these issues in anticipation of the fact that they will be coming up, and make sure that our responses to the electoral management bodies in these elections is such that they can conduct the elections with the minimum casualties and with the minimum increased infections as a result? There was recently a legislative election in Mali. After that, we saw that a number of our peacekeepers began to have greater numbers of soldiers who were affected by COVID. But it is because they played a role in helping to support the elections. So how do we ensure that we don't find ourselves in that position again? Because otherwise we will find ourselves trying to bring an end to the COVID pandemic, but at the same time not being in a position to manage that effectively. I think that going forward, we still have the opportunity to think through some of these challenges before they actually confront us. And that is the reason why I would hope that as a result of this dialogue, we begin to focus on how we make those partnerships meaningful, how we plan together, how we focus on not just bringing an end to the COVID pandemic, but to continue on dealing with the challenges of silencing the guns, making sure existing peace processes are not neglected, making sure that those places where we have challenges, we focus our attention on that as well as the COVID pandemic, if we really want to see that by the end of this year, we would have made an impact on silencing the guns. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, USG. Always very clear and straight to the point. But thank you particularly for drawing our attention to the areas where more work needs to be done. And indeed, the issues, no doubt, are all-encompassing, and we cannot overemphasize the need for proper planning and for effective management. And you've really underlined the fact that partnerships are key, but effective partnerships and strategic ones are what we need. And with that, I now have the honor to introduce a long-term strategic partner of the African Union, who is being represented today by the Honorable Commissioner for International Partnerships, Ms. Jutta Urpilainen. Commissioner, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Your Excellencies, dear fellow panelists, dear sisters and brothers, greetings from Europe. It is a pleasure to take part in today's event. I have been on many panels in my near 20 years as a politician, but today we are going to have it in virtual format because of the pandemic, and certainly a new way of working for many of us. Despite our physical distance, I'm glad that we can put our heads together for this crucial discussion. My first trip as EU Commissioner for International Partnerships outside of Europe was to Africa with the President von der Leyen. And this was back in December, pre-COVID crisis. We witnessed a confident continent brimming with potential. But more than that, we met a truly equal partner, deserving of our most positive engagement. The EU's proposal towards a comprehensive strategy with Africa presented early March does exactly this. It sets in motion a stronger, more ambitious partnership with our neighbor continent. It builds on shared interests and values. It puts women and youth at the heart of the green transition and digital transformation. It promotes sustainable investment and jobs. Just 2 days after we adopted this joint communication, the COVID-19 outbreak became a global pandemic. And though our world has been turned upside down more than ever, the crisis has brought an increased sense of urgency to our Africa agenda. As we navigate the immediate pandemic response, the recovery pace, and our long-term cooperation with Africa, our priorities remain the same. In fact, they are all the more relevant. The first priority is multilateralism. The pandemic is a case in point. Without multilateral fora such as these, we will not tackle global crises. And this is why the EU is providing support to the UN and in particular the WHO. And that is why we support the G20, the IMF and the World Bank to tackle more action on debt relief in view of this devastating pandemic. Second, to deal with the economic downturn, we need sustainable investment and jobs, now more than ever. Collaboration between Africa and Europe will be crucial to transform and diversify African economies. We continue to promote a stronger investment climate and business environment and increased intra-African trade. We focus on better energy access, on the green transition, on digital transformation, and on education and skills. Peace and stability are at the heart of our priorities with Africa. We don't want to see tension and unrest increased by the pandemic, especially in the most vulnerable regions. People affected by conflict, in particular refugees and internally displaced, and more generally women and children, will bear the consequences. So this is the time to strengthen cooperation to end conflict and safeguard governance and human rights. Women need to play a prominent role in preventing and mediating conflict. The trilateral African Union, European Union, and United Nations dialogue on peace and security is essential in this regard. Let me also stress here that our support to African peace efforts is unwavering. And this is why we stand behind African solutions to African problems, like the Silencing the Guns initiative. Finally, the EU, its member states, and European financial institutions, acting as Team Europe, have taken decisive steps in the fight against COVID. 20 billion euros, over a third of which will go to Africa, has been mobilized to address the post-crisis needs of the most vulnerable. This is global solidarity in action. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the COVID-19 pandemic has forever changed our world. The fallout will be grave and long-lasting. We have to take coordinated and comprehensive action to adapt to our new reality. But our long-term priority of a thriving and common future is resolute. It is only by coming together through multilateralism, partnerships, and international coordination that we will beat the virus and emerge stronger and more united than ever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and particularly for underlying that last point about multilateralism and why it matters for all of us. Now I have the honor to introduce someone who's literally been on the front lines since this pandemic broke out. You all know her. She also doesn't need any introduction. I have the honor to give the floor now to Dr. Matshidiso Moeti, who's the World Health Organization's Regional Director for Africa. Doctor, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to check if you can hear me, if I'm unmuted.
We can.
Okay. First of all, Excellencies, I'm very grateful to my sister Biens, the Special Advisor on Africa of the UNSG, for the invitation to join such a distinguished panel of women. So that in itself is a source of excitement. And I particularly want to thank those leaders who have spoken, and my sister Amira El Fadil, with whom I'm working on a day-to-day basis very closely, together with our colleague who runs the Africa CDC. So thank you for this opportunity to hear WHO's perspective on this extremely important theme. So the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, has highlighted the importance of global solidarity. This is where I'd like to start. Because this virus is our common enemy, and while one country is vulnerable, all countries are at risk. But we understand that people living in conditions of conflict and insecurity are the most vulnerable people in the world. And for their sake, this solidarity is even more important. We in WHO have been inspired by the leadership and creativity of African leaders. And I'd like to commend not only the determination, the action, but also the strong African solidarity that has been demonstrated under the leadership of the African Union, both the Commission and its president. We've also seen this very much at the regional level. We have worked with all the regional economic communities and the political leadership there, and the solidarity has been absolutely solid. We know that across the continent, there are 13 or so countries that are affected by conflict and insecurity, where access to services is a primary concern and is a challenge. For example, in the Central African Republic and South Sudan, only 1 in 3 people have access to basic health services. And in humanitarian contexts, we see that women die during childbirth in bigger numbers. Children fall ill from vaccine-preventable diseases because immunization services cannot reach them all, worse than happens in the already challenged situations of many of our African countries. Armed conflict can destroy health facilities. It can prevent health workers from going to work, and frontline workers can also come under direct attack. We've experienced in the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo that when conflict erupts, activities like identifying cases, tracing contacts, providing treatment, and preventing infection, and most importantly, informing people so that they understand their risk, so that they understand the actions that they need to take, must sometimes be suspended. And this means that infections, viruses, and in this case, this COVID-19, can spread undetected in communities. We're very pleased as WHO to build on the Ebola and other disease control experiences and to start off early in helping our member states to be prepared for the COVID-19 pandemic. And here I'd like to thank very much the African Union and the Africa CDC for the partnership. So we have worked to pre-position some of the capacities needed in Africa before the first cases landed. And we are very encouraged by the strong measures taken by African political leaders as soon as they started to see cases at a very high cost, we might say, both to vulnerable populations, vulnerable families, and also to the economies of our countries to stop the pandemic with some of the social distancing and physical distancing measures. As I have said, they have come at a great cost because of the proportion of people in our region who are in the informal economic sector, for example, who could not go about earning their daily bread. And we are very determined to work with the African Union to make sure that this cost gains the dividend of containing the pandemic on the African continent. We are hopeful and we're encouraged by the signs that we see that some of the projections of the evolution of the pandemic in Africa are not occurring. Even if we recognize that there is still a challenge in having enough test kits to detect every case, we do not think that there is huge numbers of African people infected and dying undetected. We've seen countries that have been able to expand testing, like South Africa, like Ghana, show that you can test hugely more numbers of people, but you do not see hugely increased numbers of cases confirmed. So it means we are seeing an impact in slowing down the rate of evolution of the pandemic in African countries. We are very, very determined to work in humanitarian context to ensure that those people living under the most difficult circumstances also are protected from the pandemic. And here we'd like to emphasize very much the partnership with the African Union, with the regional economic communities, with the humanitarian community, the civil society groups, the technical agencies, and very importantly, with communities themselves, the people on the ground, the associations of people, the most vulnerable people, refugees, internally displaced people, and migrants, women, girls, and children, to ensure that all of us play our role in containing the spread of the pandemic, in mitigating against the socioeconomic impacts, not only of the infection, but of the measures that are put in place so that we have a chance in the future to continue on the path to development in African countries, including those that are affected by pandemics. So I'd like just to end by emphasizing again this international solidarity starting from the community level, and echo the statement made by the USG Tete on recommendations to do with elections. I'd like to pledge WHO's technical support in advising the governments on how to run elections, taking into account the needs for social distancing. It might have implications for scheduling elections for more days than normally happens, but we believe that with the technical knowledge that we have and with the courageous steps taken by our governments to try out these social distancing, it is possible to carry them out even in the context of elections. And again, we'd like to echo very much the determination to use health as an agency for peace and to request for peace so that health and other social interventions can be carried out in African countries. Thank you very much for the solidarity and partnership. WHO is committed to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. And let me sincerely commend you, your team, and your leadership for the partnership and for the commitment. The WHO is our organization, and we must recognize your efforts and your leadership. So thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to go into the Q&A session, and I'm looking at my clock. We have about 15 minutes until the time allocated to us. I currently already have a list of speakers, which I will be giving the floor to one by one. In addition to that, we also have a chat box where you're able to send in your questions for the panelists. Now, before giving the floor to the panelists, I'd like to the speakers, I would like to kindly request that you keep your interventions as short as possible so that we'll be able to accommodate everybody, but also be able to come back to the panelists to respond. And in the meantime, I will try and see if we can gain a few more minutes from the organizers so that we can accommodate everybody. So once again, thank you very much to our panelists. And now we will go to the floor, starting with the first speaker. I have Ambassador Sophie Mooney, the permanent representative of Algeria. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Hello?
Yes, Ambassador, go ahead, please.
Hello? It's okay? Okay, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol reserved. Allow me, first of all, to convey my appreciation to our sister Under Secretary General Bianci Guawanas for her dynamic and tireless effort to promote the African narrative within the United Nations. Holding the African series dialogue within such a challenging time is a testimony that whenever challenges arise, opportunities for improvement and innovation come along. Thank you also to Mrs. Amina, Deputy Secretary General, and our dynamic panelists for their stimulating presentation and for wonderfully showcasing Africa's women empowerment. To this, one of the perks of the COVID-19, if any, is that in the face of a common enemy that hits humanity anywhere and everywhere and affects unequivocally people's livelihood, we need to rediscover the true meaning of cooperation and partnership. This goes through mobilizing the full capacity of our national, regional, and international institutions while acknowledging their limits and striving to improve them. To this end, I would like to share a few comments and observations as a contribution to this discussion. A strong partnership between the United Nations and the African Union is essential to effectively seek solutions to Africa's increasingly complex peace, security, and development challenges. It has also led to a more collaborative action that recognizes the comparative advantages of each organization. However, more practical steps could help in further strengthening the AU partnership by, for instance, further promote the partnership at the level of policy-making organs and not only at the level of the respective secretariats of both organizations. Second, ensure division of labor that is reinforced by a real complementarity and an innovative application of the principle of subsidiarity. And third, reinforce Africa's soft power, notably through AU and the REC's capacity building support while assuring a predictable funding and support for the hard power. Only by resolutely taking those steps can we assure that the AU-UN strategic partnership effectively addresses the challenge we face now and could anticipate new developments. And since peace and socio-economic development should be pursued simultaneously, as it is rightly reflected in the African Union Master Roadmap of practical steps to silence the gun in Africa, I would like to ask our esteemed panelists what steps they foresee to raise the partnership on climate change, biodiversity, health, and other development issues to the same level of action and engagement as the one on peace and security, while safeguarding the gains of the 2030 Agenda and Agenda 2063 from COVID-19 corollary effects. I would like briefly to add some comments on Africa's partnership in general. The African Union have developed partnership with several regions and states of the world, as well as with other multilateral organizations that have resulted in some cases in a very strong cooperation in various fields, from peace and security to eradicating poverty, promoting development, and fighting against COVID-19. However, in some stands, these partnerships that are the very fabric of multilateralism seem to lack coherence and fail sometimes to deliver their expected outcomes. To address these discrepancies, we believe that a clear division of labor based on the principles of equality and transparency could minimize competition among partners and enhance cooperation. The Sahel region is an instructive example in this case. Indeed, and although the common attention of the international community to this region is more than welcomed, given the vital importance that the international support in assisting those countries to face various scourges that cannot and should not be the sole burden of national government, there is a competing trend in the conception and creation of those partnerships or initiatives that in the end affect negatively the expected result of the cooperative action on the ground. The same goes for the effort to face the COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath, we see a proliferation of initiatives, which is in its essence a commendable expression of solidarity, but ought to redirect in a more unified way that is beneficial to all. Regional and multilateral organizations such as the AUCDC, the WHO, FAO, and obviously the UN have to be given the due support to play their role as catalytic of the international and regional action. Let me conclude by reiterating that Algeria strongly believes in the imperatives of collective and concerted action of the African Union with the support of its partners for the realization of peace and sustainable development in Africa. And it is in this spirit that my country has made financial contribution both to the African Union COVID-19 Response Fund and to the UNDP Global COVID Response Fund, but also because we are stronger together and united in solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Soufiane, for your contributions and your questions. We have a number of questions that are already coming into the chat box, so I'm going to just very quickly read them before I give the floor to the next speakers, a number of PRs who have requested for the floor. The first question is to Dr. Moeti, and the question is, how can African youth get more involved in the fight against COVID-19? Another question that's linked to that is that almost 60% of Africa's population is under the age of 25, which means there is a valuable input in this that this population can make. These are the generation that's most connected and most informed. They want to know how organizations, civil society organizations that work in the health sector, work more closely with the WHO and the African Union. Now, while you're mulling over those questions, let me quickly now give the floor to Ambassador Taye Selassie, the permanent representative of Ethiopia, and he will be followed by Ambassador Munaju, the permanent representative of Norway. Ambassadors, I'll kindly urge you to be as brief as possible so that we're able to get as many people to speak today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Fatima, and all the panelists. And also thank you for DSG Amina for your illuminating and very productive speech in many ways. And I would like also to thank USGBNC and Guyana for organizing this program. I will come to my questions, but I would like to say that the COVID-19 pandemic continues to exact a heavy human and economic and political toll on Africa, even as some developed countries begin to see a slowdown. Some of our countries on the continent are seeing a steep rise in new infection. It is becoming increasingly clear that the fight against this virus is going to be long. The recovery period is likely to be even longer unless we take a unified and proactive approach. First, we can only hasten this effort to contain the spread of the virus and mitigate the pandemic's socioeconomic impact by acting together, not alone, as many of the panelists has emphasized. In this regard, we need to strengthen global solidarity and international cooperation every step of the way until an effective vaccine or treatment is found. Regrettably, one of my questions focus on that. As we all understand, even in the midst of a global pandemic, politics continues to get in the way of humanity's collective action. As a result, the integrity and reputation of some of our multilateral institutions and the leaders are under constant assault, so to say. In this connection, what the international community, and particularly the African leaders and countries, should take to uphold the sanctity and the significance of the multilateral institutions such as the WHO. And secondly, as my Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed underscores on a number of events, he stated that the world must know that if COVID-19 is not beaten in Africa, it will continue to haunt us all, regardless of geographic location, creed, or wealth. How far this statement has been said time and again by different leaders. How far has this statement has really indeed sunk into the understanding of the world leaders? Is it taken seriously, or is it just simply, is not heeded well? And thirdly, African countries and regional organizations are doing their best to share the burden and meet their responsibility, even help each other. But we can't do it alone. We have heard a lot of encouraging statements and practical measures by a number of countries and as well as international organizations that they are coming together to fight these pandemics. But how much effort should we exert in order to effectively root out and save humanity this pandemic? And I would like also once again to reiterate my government firm support and commitment of for the Secretary General's call for global ceasefire in times of COVID-19, which was also echoed by the EU Commissioner. We believe the world doesn't have the willingness to hear the whizzing, deafening sounds of guns and bullets. The world doesn't have the hankering or desire to listen news of clashes or any saber rattling. It is a time to come together for common good and the survival of humanity. So silencing the gun will allow us to allocate critical resources to the fight against the pandemic. But finally, Ambassador Sophie and myself took the mic right after great leaders, women leaders, which is indeed an honor for two of us. But I want to note that we are here because we are the sons of a woman. We are here. I am my mother. I am my wife and I am my daughter. So I am here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador Tai. Beautiful way to end that. I want to just remind us very quickly that we have reached the allocated time, but the organizers are giving us an additional 30 minutes. I still have about a dozen people who are requesting for the floor on my list. So what I'll do is very quickly give the floor to Ambassador Mona Juul of Norway, and then bring it back to the panelists, because I think quite a few questions have been raised before we continue with the other requests. Ambassador Mona, you have the floor. Is Ambassador Mona with us? Can you unmute the PR of Norway, please? Yeah, we can't hear you. We can see you, but we can't hear you. I think you might be having a similar challenge to what I had. Can you try now? No, unfortunately, we can't hear you. Okay, I will suggest that you disconnect and reconnect. That's what I did, and it worked. And then in the meantime, I will give the floor to somebody else. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. So I will now give the floor to Ambassador Francisco Lopez, the PR of Portugal, if he's with us. Portugal. I can see him, but I can't hear him. Ambassador Lopez, are you there? Okay, we can't hear him either. Ambassador Lopez, are you there? Can you hear us? We can see you. Can you try speaking? No, we can't hear you either. Can't hear you.
Can I just make a short intervention because I need to leave, unfortunately. This is Commissioner Urpilainen.
Please go ahead, Commissioner.
I really apologize, but I have a next event waiting for me. So just a short answer to those questions which was raised for us. So first of all, I would like to say that I think at least in Europe, we have been telling this fact that as long as the COVID-19 virus is alive somewhere, none of us is saved. And I think I fully agree with the permanent representative from Ethiopia that, you know, this is the concern and we need to tell this to our citizens in order to get their support also to our solidarity measures. And this is something we have been doing in Europe. Then the other point is that I'm very happy that the youth was raised in this discussion, because I personally see that the role of the young people, especially in Africa, is crucial. And the youth is one of my personal major priority. And my plan is to engage young people in Africa in order to get their view to this Africa strategy process we are now working on with the African Union. And then thirdly, I would just like to raise that I think to conclude this debate is the fact that we need more international partnerships. And I think, you know, my title is Commissioner for International Partnerships. I can just assure you that the European Union is very willing and very committed to build up a new and strengthen our previous partnerships with the African Union, but also with the other international multilateralism organization. So thank you for this opportunity to participate in this event. I'm looking forward to working all of you also in the future. Unfortunately, I need to continue to the next event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Commissioner, for your contributions, your participation, and we look forward to our strategic partnership with you. In the meantime, maybe I will also give the opportunity to the other panelists to very briefly, if they want to comment before we get Ambassador Mona and Ambassador Francisco back. So very briefly. Commissioner Amira, please go ahead.
Yes, Ambassador Fatma, thank you for giving me the floor again. On the question about the youth involvement in this COVID-19, I would like to say that at the African Union Commission and in coordination with HRC department, the Division of Youth, and also in collaboration with our youth envoy, Aya Chepi, we have launched 2 weeks ago the Africa Youth Front on COVID-19. And it is a comprehensive initiative on the engagement of the African youth as part of this COVID-19 fight, and engaging them on the continental level, on the regional level, on the national level, going down to the grassroots level. And they have their action plan, which is being developed in collaboration with Africa CDC. It has more than 6 thematic areas. So I think through this African Youth Front on COVID-19, and there is as part of this front, there's too many civil society organizations, youth organizations as part of this initiative. So I think through this front, we can have the opportunity of engaging the youth for the sake of taking out our messages, for raising more awareness, also for having their role in the mitigation of the socio-economic impact of this COVID-19 on the continent, also having their role in communicating on the level of the communities, and in the area of testing and tracing, we are planning to give them roles, especially in the initiatives we have launched. So I think we have engaged them. We need to support their efforts so that they can play a better and a bigger role in this fight against COVID-19. And the same goes for the women also, and as SG said it in his opening remarks, that women and youth should be at the center of any response that we are going to have for COVID-19. These are only the remarks I wanted to share with you, but the youth are already fully engaged in this fight on the African Union level. Thank you, Fatma. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Commissioner. I see I see Ambassador Lopez is back with us now. Let's try again to see if we can give him the floor. Maybe we'll hear him now.
Yes, hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Moderator, dear Fatima. And special thanks also to DSG Amina Mohammed and to the distinguished panelists. Allow me 3 very quick remarks. The first, to say that the current crisis has been showing us that at 75, the UN remains agile, able to adapt, and as relevant as ever. It has been leading by example, both politically and on the ground. Secondly, these times call indeed for global solidarity and strengthened partnerships. Portugal has been supporting the health response. We have done so through WHO, and we have also announced 10 million euros at the pledging conference organized by the European Commission on May the 4th. Besides, we have also launched a new funding facility for NGO activities to tackle COVID-19 pandemic in our partner countries, mostly in Africa. On the humanitarian front, we made additional contributions to the UN system, and we joined the Team Europe, a combined effort of the European Union and its member states. Thirdly and finally, the fight against the many impacts of the pandemic is a priority, but it cannot make us lose sight of issues such as peace and security and the noble objective to silence the guns in Africa. We cannot allow and we cannot afford any backtracking on peace efforts or any new voids of state presence that may be exploited by terrorists and armed groups. Portugal remains committedly present in several of the UN peacekeeping missions in Africa, as well, and in some of the complementary European Union missions. Being on the ground, we know that these are not business as usual times. Peacekeeping and peace-building efforts must be nurtured in a context where funding, the perennial problem, may become even more complex. Stronger partnerships with international financial institutions will be essential. Transitions must equal new opportunities in areas such as women participation or the links between climate and security. They cannot be additional challenges for the countries. Dear Fatima, I also had a question about the several elections scheduled in Africa in the coming months and the role of the UN, the EU, and the international community to make sure that delays or to avoid delays and to to avoid ad hoc solutions that could lead to new situations of instability. But USG Anna Tete already replied thoroughly. So thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Lopez, dear Francisco, and good to see you. I see Ambassador Mona is back with us. Hopefully we can hear you now. Mona, could you try your mic?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Fatima, and thank you all to all the briefers and all protocol observed. I'm very conscious of the time, so let me just highlight a few points. And first of all, to convey my solidarity with the people of the African continent, as we all join forces in this collective fight against COVID-19 and work to address its dramatic impact on all sectors of society. Norway stands on Africa's side in this fight against the COVID-19 crisis. We share the AU's Peace and Security Council deep concern about the consequences of the COVID-19 on conflict prevention, peace building and peacekeeping operations in the African continent. So we must jointly do all we can to make sure that these essential operations continue through the ongoing COVID-19 crisis. The call made by the UN Secretary General and later echoed by the chairperson of the AU Commission for a complete and total ceasefire of all conflicts around the world, including in Africa, would ease, we hope, the pressure on Africa's healthcare system and release limited resources, and Norway fully support this call. The African Union has proclaimed silencing of the gun theme of the year 2020. We strongly welcome this mobilization to reduce conflict and suffering and create better conditions for development. The COVID-19 crisis hits economic growth, budget and development across the continent, but we must not allow it to curtail the work to reduce armed conflict and silence the gun. Norway has, as you know, contributed funding through several multilateral channels, and I'm pleased by the UN's swift response to Norway's proposal to establish a new UN multi-partner trust fund. The fund will assist developing countries in tackling the long-term consequences of the crisis, and I'm pleased to know that so far 16 African countries are receiving support from the fund. I'm also very pleased to say that Norway is also able to contribute to the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention and to support their important work in building national capacities and coordinating and distributing medicines and other equipment. Partnerships are even more important at this time of global crisis. So I'm pleased to inform you that last year we also established an Africa-Nordic initiative at the UN to see where Nordic and African countries find common ground and positions in order to strengthen the multilateral system. Finally, let me say a few words on vaccine. We must ensure that vaccine, once developed, it is made globally accessible and is rapidly and fairly distributed, including to vulnerable groups and low-income countries. As a founding member of and major donor to the Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, CEPI, Norway will continue to support efforts to develop an effective vaccine against COVID-19. The Norwegian government has committed to contribute an additional amount of Norwegian kroner 2.2 billion over the next 10 years to CEPI, and we are reaching out to potential donors to mobilize increased support for this work. Finally, an important lesson from the previous crisis is that we need a system for fair distribution of vaccine consisting of agreed criteria and an effective implementation mechanism. CEPI's policy and purpose is to secure fair distribution of vaccines at affordable prices in close dialogue with WHO and other key actors. I thank you.
Thank you, Mona, for your contributions. So we are at 1:17 now. I still have a list of 9 more speakers, and even at 2 minutes each, that will already take us beyond 5 minutes beyond our extended time. So I will like to ideally accommodate everybody and also give the opportunity back to our panelists, but I also know that they also have other commitments and some of them are in different time zones and they need to move on. So I would like to crave your indulgence, ambassadors, to try and be as brief and as straight to the point as possible. I will now give the floor next to Ambassador Anne Gauguin of the Permanent Representative of France, and she will be followed by Ambassador Mohammed Koba, the DPR of Indonesia. Is Anne with us? Okay, we'll go ahead and give the floor to Ambassador Mohammed of Indonesia before Anne joins us.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the UN Office of Special Advisor to Africa for convening this dialogue series and the panelists for their presentation. I know time is short, so let me be brief. Let me focus my intervention on the following points. First, the realization of silencing the guns in Africa is even more urgent now as we are fighting the COVID-19. The Secretary General call for global ceasefire, therefore, must be implemented by all parties on the ground. As one of the co-sponsors of the Security Council Resolution 2457/2019, Indonesia is fully committed to supporting the silencing the guns in Africa, including through our contribution to peacekeeping operation in Africa. Second, the role of regional and sub-regional organizations is crucial to ensuring the success of the Silencing the Guns in Africa initiative. We welcome enhanced partnership between the UN and the African Union and encourage closer engagement between the African Union and its counterparts in other regions, including ASEAN. Third, the international community must continue supporting ASEAN countries in dealing with COVID-19, as well as realizing the SDGs and the Agenda 2063. COVID-19 has presented an unprecedented threat to Africa's hard-won development and economic gains. On our part, we are committed to strengthening our Indonesia-Africa partnership. In 2018, we held the Indonesia-Africa Forum and subsequently Indonesia-African Infrastructure Dialogue in 2019, which resulted in concrete economic cooperation in infrastructure, trade, connectivity, and strategic industries. The partnership is also evident through various technical cooperation and capacity building programs. As long-standing partner to Africa, Indonesia will continue its contribution to the realization of lasting peace and development in the continent. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Mohammed. Do we have Anne with us now? No. Okay, so we'll move on very quickly to Ambassador Tricia Hoshino of Japan. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Fatima, for the floor. Japan seriously believes this COVID-19 pandemic has become one of the most devastating events of the human security crisis in our time. So Prime Minister expressed Japan's commitment to step up its assistance to partner countries to strengthen their healthcare systems, including through science-based innovation and solutions addressing the enormous impact of economic downturn. Reflecting on lessons learned from the 2014-2016 Ebola outbreak in West Africa, Japan has further enhanced our support to the achievement of the universal health coverage, building our response capabilities and preparedness against infectious diseases in Africa. Yes, Japan is supporting Africa CDC since the its launch in 2017. So thank you very much, Commissioner Amina, for recognizing our partnerships to Africa CDC. In fact, Japan have been working closely with infectious disease laboratories and local medical researchers for over 40 years through technology transfer, collaborative research, and regional networking in the spirit of local solutions for global issues. Today, we are proud to see how Ghana's Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research, Kenya Medical Research Institute, and the University of Zambia and other institutions are leading the fight against coronavirus as centers of excellence. Under the banner of NAPSA, a new approach for peace and security in Africa, announced by Prime Minister Abe at TICAD 7 in August last year, Japan will continue to fully support Africa-led conflict prevention efforts as a partner, including AU's Silencing the Guns in Africa initiative. It is widely acknowledged that silencing the gun requires more than simply taking on the guns themselves. As advocated in Japan's NAPSA, strong and efficient institutions, including health systems, can also help achieve the goal of the silencing the guns, as can quality education, food security, employment, good governance, and more. Those are among the standard menu of a holistic human security approach that Japan envisions, strengthening national solutions which are compatible with local realities by combining peace and security with inclusive socio-economic development and institution building for the better ensuring the survival, livelihood, and dignity of the people. So we stay resolute to work together in partnership with you to build back better, a more resilient and inclusive society in Africa. This should be possible only with a collective engagement across the continent. In this vein, TICAD, as you know, is a living and evolving mechanism. It will serve as a vital platform that leverages multi-stakeholder collaborations and partnerships, strategic and substantive one, for Africa at scale in this time and post-COVID-19 era toward TICAD 8, which is scheduled in 2022. So let's move on. Thank you very much for the floor. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoshino. I now give the floor to Mr. Serra from Italy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All protocols observed. I will try to be very short. As the Secretary General noted this morning, the African governments have responded swiftly to the COVID-19 crisis. Now it's time for the international community to stand in solidarity with the African continent. If we want to succeed globally in the fight against the pandemic, it is crucial to succeed in Africa. Solidarity is a necessity, and Italy has been at the forefront of the global, multilateral, and multidimensional response to COVID-19. We consistently promoted the priority of the universal and equitable access to the vaccine and other life-saving treatments in order to leave no one behind. We have also promoted the financial mobilization of the existing international instruments in favor of COVID-19 response. As a member of the G7 and the G20, Italy decided to suspend debt service payments for 2020 for the poorest countries, 40 of which are African countries. Now it would be important for the private sector to contribute to the good outcome of the G20 action. As incoming president of the G20, Italy will prioritize discussion on debt relief for African countries. Let me also stress the importance that we attach to the UN-African Union relationship, as well as to the United Nations African Union, European Union trilateral cooperation. We stand ready to give our contribution to further strengthen this partnership. Italy is fully committed to support the African Union and its member states in fulfilling the objectives of the initiative on silencing the guns by 2020, providing financial assistance, training, and capacity building programs. The role of partnership is also crucial in implementing the 2030 agenda and the 2063 agenda. We cannot allow this crisis to derail the historic progress made so far in Africa. Building sustainable and long-term partnerships is exactly the spirit with which Italy will keep strengthening its relationship with Africa. Our geography, our common history, our friendship, and our shared destiny makes the African continent a strategic priority of our foreign policy. Let me conclude wishing you a happy Africa Day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Serra from the Permanent Mission of Italy. I now have the honor to give the floor to Ms. Ravendrini, who is the Director of UNHCR, and then this will be followed by the PRs of Senegal, Liberia, Egypt, and Morocco, our African Union champions, and then we will close the list and go back to our panelists very briefly. Mr. Vendrini, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I won't take up too much of your time, just a couple of quick comments. One, I was very encouraged to hear some of the panelists and of course the Secretary General, USG Gavanas and the Deputy Secretary General referring to the specific situation of the refugees and IDPs. This is just a reminder, Ambassador, that there are over 25 million refugees and IDPs. These are people uprooted by war and persecution on the African continent. And I think someone had said before me that the virus does not discriminate, but its impact does. And this is particularly the case in relation to refugees and IDPs because they have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. Their lives were already precarious prior to the pandemic, and now during and post-pandemic, it threatens to be quite catastrophic. And our absolute priority, UNHCR's absolute priority in this regard, is working with governments in the host countries to ensure that the refugees and IDPs are included in the national prevention, preparedness, response and recovery plans. And to ensure this, we have been working very closely with these governments, providing medical equipment, establishing field hospitals and increasing the capacity of health workers in these countries. But we are deeply conscious of the fact that most of these countries are low-income or middle-income countries and require assistance beyond what UNHCR or the UN family can get. And this is, again, like previous speakers before me, I underline the need and the importance of multilateral partnerships and funding in this regard, particularly the international and regional financial institutions, which we hope will probably fill the gap that some of our traditional donors may not be able to do, because we understand that some of our bilateral donors are grappling with economic challenges as a result of the pandemic on their own territories. So we really are looking to IFIs and the regional financial institutions to cover that gap. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Vendrini, especially for providing us with some of these statistics, which are very real. I now have the honor to give the floor to the PR of Senegal, followed by the PR of Liberia. Ambassador, you have the floor. Ambassador Sheikh? Okay. Before we get Ambassador Sheikh, I will give the floor to Ambassador Kamiya of Liberia. Ambassador Kamiya? Okay, I can see he's online, but we can't hear him. Let me move on now to Ambassador Mohammed Idris. My dear brother, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, my dear sister. I know that you are running against time. Congratulations for the Happy Africa Dialogue Series and Happy Africa Day to follow very soon. Thank you very much, dear sister Gawanes, for organizing this first, maybe unprecedented series dialogue in this virtual format. And of course, the thanks and appreciation goes to the DSG and USG Hanateti, Commissioner Amina, and the Commissioner Yuta and Dr. Moeti. I think this highlights that silencing the guns cannot be achieved unless we silence many other vulnerabilities. They are all interconnected together, and no one can be silenced if the other is still voicing loud. And I think this crisis highlights also that international cooperation is not a virtue, but it is a necessity. And multilateralism also is not an a la carte menu. It is a discipline which we should all follow because our destiny is so much interconnected together. We have, of course, for this crisis, there are short-term, long-term measures, and all of them needs this multilateral framework and multilateral cooperation. When it comes to health or economy, actually, despite both have different mode of safety, but they are so much also linked to our human destiny and our joint destiny. For health safety, we need separation and isolation. But for economic safety, we need interconnectedness and we need interdependence and cooperation. And both of them cannot be, no party can be safely health-wise unless everyone is health safely-wise and also economically if everyone is vulnerable, the all will be vulnerable as well. And I think now we need to launch a safe campaign for 2030 agenda and for 2063 agenda. African countries and African leaders and African people really have shown remarkable resilience in this process and lots of success stories which worth being projected and documented. To end, I want just to refer to the enhanced partnership between the AU and UN. So also, and to ask about how this partnership could be further enhanced in view of the current global crisis, and also the global supply chain of the UN, how can it be of value and help to serving and helping some measures which we are trying to do within our African continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Another question there regarding enhancing AU-UN partnership. So I hope our panelists are taking note. I'll now give the floor to my dear brother, Ambassador Omar Hilale. And before then, we'll try and get Ambassador Sheikh back as a panelist and also Ambassador Kamiya's microphone. Ambassador Omar, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, my dear sister Fatima. I would like to congratulate our sister Beyonce for the organization of this day. It's very fruitful, very substantive, and very important for our continent. I have just three small observations and one question. First of all, because he was fully aware of the serious impact of COVID-19 on African countries and population, His Majesty King Mohammed VI has proposed the launch of an initiative by African head of states that aims to establishing an operational framework to support African countries in their various phases of managing the pandemic. My second observation is is that Morocco is totally convinced that the response to the COVID-19 pandemic should be based on multilateral, inclusive, and solidary approach. No country can by itself win the battle against the pandemic, but all of us united, we can. Increasing international support to Africa is not only a necessity, but an imperative of the international community in order to support the continent's effort to deal with this pandemic and its aftermath, as well as to achieve its vision of silencing guns and for achieving economic and social development. My last observation is related to the need to promote more agriculture development, food security, and the transformation of agro-business in Africa. Access to food and agriculture security are now synonymous of national and continental sovereignty, especially in times of crisis. Therefore, we have to draw from national experiences and in fields where we deliver best. My question, my dear sister, is I would like to ask how African partnership dealing with peace and stability can go beyond the political point of view and security dimension and encompass socio-economic and human development issues. For example, Morocco has been able to develop human and technological skills to engage at large scale in fields of food and agriculture industry, and we remain committed to South-South cooperation with these African countries in this field. Thank you very much, my dear sister.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador. I now see Ambassador Sheikh of Senegal has been able to join us. Ambassador Sheikh, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Sister Fatima. Greetings to all. I don't have a question to ask, but just comments to comments which have been made earlier. And I would just say this, and I'll be very short. My delegation believes that an appropriate response to COVID-19 in Africa and the bolstering of partnerships to silence the guns are two processes which are interlinked and mutually reinforcing. These two objectives must be pursued resolutely in parallel in these affected areas where we are seeing an uncontrolled circulation of soul and where we are seeing terrible pressure on the living conditions of the people. And only a holistic approach can help not only grasp all the nuances related to the issue, but also better adapt solutions to the problem at hand. In this regard, a special attention should be given to populations. with a proper assistance to governments and organizations intervening in these areas, making sure that the assistance reaches those in need, making sure, thanks to the establishment of solid partnerships, that the capabilities of governments are bolstered, and making sure that we have safety to aid organizations, where we have lines and routes of supply safeguarded and not interrupted to enable all the medical supply to reach their targets. That being said, above all, priority must be given to prevention, thanks to an extended campaign to the populations on the health measures to be taken at the level of communities, which is a real challenge in an environment affected by terrorism, intercommunity conflicts, piracy, drug trafficking, IFF, and illegal arms transactions. And in countries where we have peace rehabilitation in place, that campaign also must be pursued alongside the continuation of the implementation of the DDR programs and the security reform programs. In a nutshell, I would say that taking into consideration the country's vulnerabilities, only a determined commitment by the international community, both the UN and African Union, can make a decisive difference on the ground. And the host of measures consisting in continuing the campaign for debt relief in these countries facing the loss of fiscal base, acting quickly to face the emergency food aid to countries threatened by a looming food crisis, providing emergency medical supplies, fostering solidarity, the exchange of experiences and coordination between countries and also between countries and organizations, and then finally pursuing resolutely the full effect of all existing instruments and policies in Africa aiming at silencing the gun. Thank you, sister.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador Sheikh. Now, last but not the least, before going back to the panelists, I'd like to give the floor to Ambassador Kamiya of Liberia. And once again, apologize to everyone for this delay, but it only shows the importance and the interest that this particular topic brings. So Ambassador Kamiya, you have the floor before we go back to our panelists. Are you there, Ambassador? Okay, we still can't hear him, unfortunately. And due to the delay, we can't wait any longer. If he's able to join us at some point, we'll still give him the floor. Now I would like to just go back to our distinguished panelists. There've been a number of comments, but some very interesting questions that have come up from the floor. Issues of peace and security, of overcoming political hurdles, the issue of youth, which is critical. We've also heard some statistics, and of course the issue of ensuring how the most vulnerable amongst us, and in particular refugees and IDPs, are not left behind. So I'll start by giving the floor back to USG Hannah Tete. Maybe you can start off the panelists this time around, and then we'll go to the others. Thank you.
And I'll focus, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
I'll focus my comments on the partnership. Indeed, I think that it is important for us to be able not just to strengthen the partnerships on the Partnership for Africa's Integration and Development, we have 3, the Partnership on Development, which focuses on the SDGs, and Agenda 2063, and then the Partnership on Peace and Security. Given the fact that there is a significant organizational capacity of the United Nations, but on the same side, we don't have as many partner organizations of the African Union. I think it's important for the UN itself to better coordinate, to work with its partner, the African Union. And that is the way that we will be able to streamline our processes and our initiatives in a way that we can work together and actually concretely implement policies and initiatives in member states. For that reason, we don't even only need to have coordination with the Commission, we need to have coordination with the PRC in Addis in order to be able to have, again, a better sense of what member states would like us to prioritize, how best to undertake that, and how best we can make sure that together we can deliver and provide the necessary support, as has been demonstrated can be done between Africa CDC and WHO, as we are now having to deal with the COVID pandemic. On the other issue of how the AU can benefit from some of the structures of the UN, especially when it comes to logistical support, that requires essentially to have an agreement between the African Union and the United Nations to be able to provide that support. Now, I'm aware that our colleague USG Atul Kari is open to that discussion and has indicated that he would welcome that kind of initiative. And so I think and I'm aware that some informal dialogue has started. So my view is that it's just a matter of time, but we need to be able to engage each other to formalize that so that we will be able to implement it in a meaningful way. Finally, I would like to make the point that, especially with regard to solidarity and support in the fight against COVID, as Ambassador Amde of Ethiopia stated very well, if we are not able to deal with COVID on the African continent, it is not going to go away in the rest of the world either. So it's important that our member states should be able to be supported in this fight in the way in which the UN is trying to do through WHO Africa and also through other agencies. On the issue of refugees and internally displaced persons, I would also like to add to that the plight of illegal migrants. This is not the time to return irregular migrants to AU member states, especially for countries that are in the process of coping with their own COVID challenges. To have deportations at this time from other states that perhaps have better social security systems to be able to cope and support such irregular migrants, I think is the kind of solidarity that we should be looking for on the international stage. You should be helping to make the situation better. You should not be helping to make it worse. Thank you very much.
USG Hannah Tete. I've been informed by the organizers that we absolutely have to wrap up. But I would really want to give 1 minute to Dr. Moeti to be able to respond. And Commissioner Amina, I will kindly apologize since you've had the opportunity to come back to the floor, to maybe just quickly wrap up and give us her comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that the direct question was responded to very well by the Commissioner about young people. So I think I will leave it there just to say that we are running virtual trainings in Afro, and we'd be very happy to run training for our young people, young medical students, so that they're better prepared for the roles that we are really expecting them to play on the ground, to expand rapidly the capacities of ministries of health, because we are asking the ministry to be on the ground, beyond the capital cities, at the local level, at the community level. And we think students could play a powerful role, and our role could be really to enable them, to give them the latest guidance, to provide virtual training so that they can play this role. And we will be very happy to do this with the Commission. Because we don't have time, I think it's just to thank the ambassadors for their wisdom and for the ideas that they propose. I would just like to say a couple of things in conclusion. One, in relation to solidarity, that this virus is going to be with us for some time. We may flatten the curves, we may bring down the peaks. Luckily, if we have a vaccine, we expect and we hope very much for solidarity. But it was said by a couple of the ambassadors, one of the best ways to guard against not only COVID-19, but other pandemics in the future is to build health systems and to build the capacities of countries to withstand pandemics. I'd like to say that in Afro, we've been very troubled, and here I'd like to apologize in advance, that after the West Africa pandemic, after the West Africa Ebola outbreak, African countries worked very hard to analyze their gaps in readiness for pandemics, epidemics, and prepared their national plans. We were hoping very much that international solidarity would kick in and finance these plans. So after that painful lesson, we've observed that really that solidarity has not been forthcoming. And here we are having to help them to scale up capacities very rapidly for this pandemic. So one of my hopes is that after this, there will really be that wisdom to realize that in terms of the billions that are being spent now, that steady investment in these systems over a few years would have made a big difference. And then finally, just to say that WHO is coordinating the UN procurement platform, and we are very open to discussing with the African Union. I've already had a word with my sister Amira on this, how to work synergistically so that African countries are not disadvantaged on the international market in having access to these key commodities that are critical to the response. Thank you very much for a wonderful session.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And very quickly, let me thank once again our distinguished panelists. Thank you to OSAA and the team for organizing this. And just to remind everybody that the ADS does continue. We'll start again at 9 a.m. tomorrow. If you didn't have the opportunity to speak today, you still have an opportunity tomorrow and the day after. So please do join us, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you, everyone, and stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your evening or day or morning, depending on where you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ambassador, for guiding this discussion. We can see from the level of participation how really valuable and really informative this really sets the tone for the following two days of work. So as you said, this is the end of the first session, the second session, and the end of the first. Tomorrow we will resume at 9 o'clock New York time sharp with section 3 on the African Continental Free Trade Area and in relation to the opportunities it provides for silencing the guns and overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we'll see you tomorrow. Just to draw attention, as the Secretary General mentioned today, the policy brief on COVID-19 and impact on Africa has just been released today. OSAA had the pleasure of coordinating the preparation of that brief, and I think it is very, very valuable material that also has some concrete ideas for policymakers in dealing with the current crisis, but also on long-term issues of turning the recovery into an opportunity for a stronger Africa. Just wanted to draw attention to that. So thank you very much. Thank you for your patience, and I think tomorrow will be a better day from the technical perspective. Hopefully, we'll work on the issues. Thank you, and good night.
Thank you very much. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you, Sister Fatima. Thank you, Brother Tamrat. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. All the best, everyone. Thank you, Your Excellency, to Addis Ababa, to SG Hannah.
Hannah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
And to Miss Addis Ababa as well.
Yes.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
All the best. Be well, stay safe.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Gawanis.
Gawanis.
Bye. Thank
OSAA
you.
team. All OSAA team, goodbye. Thank you very much.
OSAA team.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Marco and Joseph.
Anytime, my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Grateful to all the team. Really happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Tricia.
And apologies for the extension. Bye-bye.
It has been great. Thank you very much. Thank you. We will improve tomorrow.
I will end the event. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ben. Bye.
This meeting is no longer being recorded.